In 1984, New York, I had been a part of the New York punk scene, and it was becoming a real drag in New York. The clubs were, and it was becoming where in clubs like CBGB's or Max's, where I would walk in and know everybody, I would walk in and see one person I knew. So I decided to pack up my bags and move to Los Angeles. I was walking down the street and I saw Smog, and he introduced me to Marc Rude. Marc invited me to his birthday party that he was having, and I went. I was dating someone else then, and we went, and it turned out to be at 2 o'clock, a typical Hollywood party, which I was not at all used to. I'm a New Yorker. We party all night long. At 2 a.m. the police show up, and of course I got arrested that night because I wasn't aware that you couldn't tell the LAPD to fuck themselves. So anyway, that was my first meeting with Marc Rude, and we were friends for the duration of the time I was here. Did artwork. I played for benefits for him, my band, the Born Losers, and we were friends.
After he'd been addicted to drugs, he and I went through this whole drug thing, and in 1990 he stopped everything, and he'd been off everything for like 6 years. Like, he was clean and, didn't have a drop of alcohol, nothing, From 1990 to 1996, right before he moved to New York, he changed. He got a lot calmer. He got a lot more, balanced. He got a lot more just more available in that way. And he was, really just, everything was just not quite such a big deal. And and he seemed to really be okay with all that. But, that was that chunk of his life. But, he and I were never together during that time. We tried to be, but it was just too dangerous, because it would always lead us. We would always end up back in that dark world together.
That was the Marc I knew for that whole time, was sober Marc. He would tell me I used to be pretty wild, and I didn't doubt it. He was sober. He didn't drink. He didn't do drugs. Yeah. No, he drank Coca-Colas, and he smoked cigarettes.
1998, I was on my birthday, June 1st. I was walking down the street in New York City. I'd just come back from Europe, and I saw some friends of mine at a cafe called the Pick Me Up Cafe, and I started talking to them, and I look over, and there's Marc sitting there, and I was shocked. I said, "Marc Rude?" And he looked at me, and we kind of laughed and started talking, and every day we kind of coincidentally, even though it was like 25 blocks out of both of our ways, we're ending up at the Pick Me Up Cafe at the same time every day to meet each other, and started talking about, what a drag it was going out with like 20-year-olds, how boring they were, that we felt like historians instead of boyfriends or girlfriends. And I remember one line in particular that Marc said to me was, "When am I going to meet the one that's going to go the duration?" And I knew right then it was me. And we, every day we saw each other, and every day we got closer, and we became intimate. Marc and I had been seeing each other every day up until this day, and then he just disappeared. And I called, and he was like, I knew something was wrong, but he wouldn't tell me. And then the 4th of July, I was again standing on St. Mark's Place with a group of friends, and I saw him from down the street, and I could just see from how he was walking, just how he looked, something horrible had happened. And he came up to me and he told me that Wendy had been murdered. A serial killer named Jeff Jones murdered Wendy. They found her in the New Yorker hotel, hogtied and beaten beyond recognition. Marc had to identify her body by a tattoo he'd done on her back. That night he moved in with me, and we lived in hotels for a while, and then we got our own apartment. Marc was clean. Marc was shattered. I'd known Marc a long time, and I had never seen Marc like this. He had come to New York to reestablish a relationship with his sister Wendy, and then, bang, like that, she was murdered.
When was that when you came out to New York?
We had been at the Scrap Bar in New York, and I was plastered because I used to play there and I got free drinks, and boy, I took advantage of it, believe me. And he's escorting his drunken girlfriend home. And I'm like staggering down the streets in New York and just, ooh. And it just slipped out, you know, like I said, you know what? I fucking love you. I love you. You're fucking great. I love you. And he said to me, he said, you're going to regret that in the morning. And I said, no, I'm not. I love you. I've loved you since the moment we started talking. And like a couple days went by. We were hoteling it then. It was before we found our apartment. And there's this hotel uptown called the Belvedere on 72nd and Broadway. And I called. There's tricks to getting hotel rooms in New York. You can't just walk in, because if you look like we look, they'll just throw you out. So I called up and I said, hi, this is Mrs. Hoffman. My husband and I have just arrived into New York City. We're in LaGuardia Airport, and we're taking a taxi, and do we need to make a reservation? And they said, oh no, just come on down. So it's raining. So Marc and I are hauling all of our luggage out of this other horrible hotel we were in. And we get up there. It's like about a $15 cab ride. And we walk in, we're drenched, and Marc covered in his tattoos, me tattooed up, my hair leathered up, fur, the whole bit. And they take one look at us, and they said, they had bulletproof glass up. They said, sorry, we have no rooms. And both me and Marc went fucking ballistic on him. We're both like, Marc's like, you motherfucker. And I'm this, Marc and me are exactly the same. I'm like beating on the fucking glass. I got my arm through that little hole. I'm gonna grab that little bastard and pull him through. And so finally we like realized we were not gonna be able to get through the bulletproof glass. So we go out on the street, and Marc's just standing there going, what are we gonna do now, man? And I was like, fuck these motherfuckers. We'll get another hotel. Fuck these assholes. We got credit cards. Fuck them. So I said, come on. And we got the luggage. And he goes, we're standing there in the pouring rain, and he goes, you know what? Screams at me. He goes, I fucking love you too, damn it. He goes, and when he was in jail, he wrote me that letter back, reminding me of that. He told me he loved me because I don't ever give up. And I don't, usually, but yeah, it was very funny. We got an apartment, and he just sat there. He was so paralyzed with grief. And But he stayed clean. I was so impressed because I was not clean. I was on methadone and had a double habit going. And I couldn't believe that somebody could get through this clean, and he did it. But at my suggestion, he started seeing my psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist gave him Ativan and Ambien, which he desperately needed because he was going for weeks without sleeping. He needed it, and he was going twice a week to see our doctor, and then we would go together. And he continued to do this for, I don't know, 8 months or so. And it helped him a lot. And then one day, he just said to me, honey, since the minute I stepped off the plane, feel like I stepped in shit and I can't get out of it. I want to go back to LA. And me, I'm like a gypsy. I just, okay. So we packed up and we left and we went back to LA. Got a place in Silver Lake. And he started tattooing right away and doing, getting back into the flow of things and working the door at some club in Silver Lake, I don't remember, and work tattooing in the day.
We had lost touch with each other. I liked tattoos. Marc liked tattoos. I knew Marc was becoming a tattoo artist. And I didn't know much more about it, but I was looking through a tattoo magazine one day, and there is this big picture of Mayhem Tattoo Studio and a picture of Marc sitting there. Okay, and so I just went, oh my God, I can't believe it. I immediately grabbed the phone. We did get together. I brought him out to my house. We went out to dinner with my family. He got to meet my 3 kids and my wife. It was great. We had a really nice time. I knew he was living with this person. Her name was Lyn, and he was in this relationship, and I knew he really cared about her a lot. And, we went to dinner and everything with my family, but I hadn't met Lyn yet. And then later we went to his house, and I met Lyn, and it was shocking because it was extremely obvious that this girl had a major serious drug problem. She was totally out there. Emotionally, she was scattered to all 4 corners of the earth. She was total chaos. And the first thing in my mind is, here's somebody that I care about a lot, Marc, and it's I see him with somebody that I can tell immediately on meeting that this is a disaster, waiting to happen. This is total chaos, and that this is probably the last person on earth that he should be with, especially because he was trying to get sober. He was going for therapy. He was doing all the things he was trying to do to get his life together. And he was with somebody who was doing heroin, who was like a total basket case, totally insane.
His integrity. I mean, he was, a man of integrity, and he always stood up to his word, and he always cared about what was going on. And I just really wish that a lot of the bad parts of his life weren't there, because I mean, fuck, if Marc didn't have those bad parts of his life, I mean, look at what he accomplished. Imagine if he would have accomplished twice as much with his life. That would have been phenomenal. That would have been superhuman, and it's just it's sort of sad that there were certain factors in his life maybe holding him back a little bit, and I wish he could have had many more years to keep on going, because he would have kept on doing great stuff to the very end.
So in New York, he'd been diagnosed as being adult onset diabetes, which can be controlled through diet. And I put him on his diabetic diet, and he was doing wonderful. He dropped 40 pounds. He looked fabulous. And he felt good, and he was starting to feel good again, and he was working. And he said, Lyn, I'm going to stop taking this Ativan. I kicked heroin. I kicked drinking. I kicked everything. These stupid little pills are nothing. And I told him, Mark, you can't do that. These are different. You got to ease off of them. They mess with your head. And Mark could be a very stubborn man. I have to say that. Everyone knows that. And when Mark wanted something, Mark did it. So Mark just stopped them.
When they take you off those psych meds, man, they usually break it down into a cycle where you're weaning yourself off of it, you know, and he had a real hard time coming off of them. And I mean, I'm not beginning to make any excuses for anything at all, you know, as to what I don't even know exactly what happened over there, but he was trashing the apartment and you know, I guess he knocked her around too. I don't know, but I remember both he and her telling me that he was like yelling and crying and talking about his father, you know, saying daddy and things like that while all of this was going on. You know, he had a real, his father was a bastard, you know, was a complete freak. He was you know, showed a lot of violence towards him and you know, pulled guns on him and stuff. I mean,
yeah, I'm sure he wasn't good to his wife either.
no, you know, I'm sure that whole family you know, was under his tyranny, you know, and he's a cop, so he's got issues with what, you know, some people's motivation to be police officers is power trip, you know, and you know, to be surrounded by violence and get paid for it, you know, and
there's not much you can do when the cops doing that, you know.
yeah. And you know, somebody in the building going to intervene, and it's like, hell no, you know.
Right.
He came home from work, took a baseball bat, smashed the television, smashed a lamp, smashed a little table, and then fell out on the couch, out cold. I was scared to death. I didn't know what was wrong with him. I couldn't wake him up. And I called 911, expecting paramedics, and the Rampart Division shows up, which I guess has become legendary. We didn't know who they were, what it was. Next thing I'm told, when they arrest him, they take him to jail, I'm told that I was beaten with the baseball bat, that I have broken ribs, that he's arrested for spousal abuse, and this is his third count. I later found out that was all, that the third count, there was no counts. There was no, on me there was nothing. I mean, if Marc Rude took a baseball bat to me, I would not be sitting here speaking to you. I'd be a cripple in a crippled wheelchair or something. Everybody knows he's legendary for his temper, or his temper how he used to be. So he went to jail for 45 days, and then he went to court, case was dismissed, and we thought that was that.
Like while he was in jail, Lyn sold his record collection to, you know, raise money for his bail, which didn't go to his bail.
Oh, I mean, I saw it. I mean, and to see the conflict where one person is in the total grips of full, you know, drug addiction and insanity and living a life that's just even more insane, and a guy who's like going to Narcotics Anonymous, going to therapy, taking medication, trying to stay clean and sober. How do you see? I mean, I was in AA for 19 and a half years, okay? Even if I wasn't one of his best and closest friends, I would have tried to help anybody in that situation and say to them, this does not work. You cannot fix this. This is not your job to fix. This person has to get better because they want to get better, and they need to do what they need to do that. You can't do it for her. You know, he was going to stay and fix it. We had conversations where I said, dude, you're like trying to do all these things and you're with somebody that's literally a junkie, you know, and totally insane. Like, this is not going to end good, you know. And he would tell me, I know what you're saying. I understand what you're saying, you know, but I love her, I don't want to leave her. And I said, okay. You know, and it's like, and there was nothing I could do. It was just, it was like how Mark is. I don't know if he thought he could save her. I don't know if he thought he owed her anything, but he felt he needed to be there for her. And
no, by then I was sober again. I was back.
So you actually had some money?
Yeah, working and money and all of those fantastic things.
Was he using?
I thought he was using.
Did you?
I didn't confront him on it. You know, it wasn't until the end when, like, he had been arrested, and they had him in like over a Thanksgiving period.
Arrested for what?
The domestic abuse.
Oh, with Lyn?
Yeah, and and they had him in for a while, and then they dropped it. They let him out, and they had a time frame to make the case, and they dropped it, and then they later decided to open it back up and prosecute him on it. And
how do you know that?
He was hiding from the house because they were coming by the house with warrants for him. So he was hiding out from the house, and I remember he came over here and wanted to. It was like actually one of the. I'm trying to think. He'd come by a couple of times and he'd stop by and say hi, and he'd have like a backpack full of punk rock singles that he'd be taking to sell at the area record stores to try to get money going and stuff. And remember the last time I saw him, he came over and he got really pissed at me because he wanted for he and Lyn and Vlad, his fucking Doberman, he wanted the three of them to come and stay at my house. And he had a warrant, and and I was just, it was just too much for me. I was just, Mark, I'll help you out in any way I can, but this house is too small for the four of us, you, me, her, and the dog. And he was real pissed, but
What did he say to you? What was he pissed at?
he was just, he didn't. I could just tell that he was really pissed. He was pissed at me. He was pissed at everybody, and he had been on a lot of. He had taken a lot of Valium. And he was just like on a shitload of Valium, so he was like raged and tranquilized at the same time. And I just remember like all this dried spittle in the corners of his mouth, and I kept trying to give him water, because he obviously needed some fucking hydration, and he just wouldn't drink any water, and he was just pissed off. And he saw himself as this like gunslinger desperado guy, though, there was like this thing going on with all of that where he thought that he was the outlaw on the horse running from the sheriff and the posse and all that. And it was like, it wasn't that way, but he saw it that way. He expressed that.
Because she was such a mess, and she was the reason for Mark leaving Los Angeles. The problems she was causing made it impossible for them to stay in LA, and he had to leave. There was a question of domestic violence that may or may not have taken place, that she actually had called the cops on Mark. And I believe that there had been a case against him that was dropped and then reopened later because I think he had threatened to leave her, and she had called the cops again. And so then they got back together, and it was now the problem, there's going to be a problem. They're going to come and arrest me again, because he did spend some time in county jail over this. And they had to leave Los Angeles because of this. And this was because she was stark raving mad. She was an absolute lunatic. I don't know that any of the domestic violence with her even took place. I think that, maybe it did, maybe it didn't, but she used it as a tool, a weapon against him to try to keep him with her. And, when it didn't work and he was trying to leave her, she called the police and made it an issue again. When I may have seen her 10 times, all 10 times I saw her, she was completely wasted. Whether it was methadone or heroin, I know that look. It was one of those two. Okay? So that look is a junkie. That look is, I can't explain it. You go find a junkie who's a practicing junkie, and you know what they look like. They slur their words, they nod out while you're talking to them. They are like half conscious, half unconscious, and they're like in another world while they're high. And I know what it's like. I may not have ever been a junkie, but I did do enough heroin to know what the feeling was like, and I certainly know what it looked like. So.
Thanks for explaining that, because the people.
She dropped the charges, and then the DA decided to press charges, even though she didn't want to. And Marc lost it. Marc did what he knew how to do best, run. And they fled, and they started doing drugs, and they got strung out, and no one heard from him for like 5 years. Not a word. He was pissed at all of us in Los Angeles for not putting him and Lyn up, and their dog, maybe it was 2 dogs, and he left town angry.
He was talking about going up to Seattle, him and Lyn. So I was helping them out, getting stuff ready.
Do you have a job lined up there?
No, I don't think he had any work lined up. I think Lyn had some of her family there, and then he was having a little bit of problems, I think, here with the law. I mean, it was just something that really wasn't brought up. It just seemed like it was for personal reasons, and it was just sort of pushed aside a little bit. And if it's time to leave LA, it's time to leave LA. And I was like, okay, well, if you have to leave, I try to help him out as much as I could.
Marc had gotten on, since Wendy had been killed, had gotten on this thing where he was going to repair my family. So my mother and I had been speaking for the first time in probably 10 years for about the last 3 years. And she asked us to come up to Seattle. And she said she was dying. Well, my mother's been dying for the last 20 years. But so we went to Seattle, and he worked there.
And then they're up at Seattle. Can't remember the name of the shop. I think it's called Ohm Tattoo or something. Yeah, he was working there, and I talked to him there in Seattle for a couple times. I think Lyn's family was going to help them out somewhat, and something fell through there, and it wasn't working out in Seattle.
I was at a Sub Pop party, and I'm walking around. I remember Tad was playing, and I'm standing there, and I see this guy walk by, and I'm like, that's fucking Marc Rude. Marc, what are you doing up here? And he's like, Heff, what, God, good to see you, and man, you're looking good, and blah, 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 and, we were talking, and he looked great. The guy, I mean, best I've ever seen him look in my life. I mean, just, but I remember also, like, I totally remember, like, when I saw him at that instant, I was going, man, he's a really little guy. He's a really little guy. Because he was always fucking bigger than life, So the next day I called him up and I said, hey, let's go out and have coffee. So we ended up at some little dive place, and we had coffee, and we sat and we talked, and he was telling me about living with this, the love of his life, Lyn, and the reason why he was up here was because he had gotten arrested for tattooing a girl that was like 14 years old, and her dad had turned him into the police. So they were after him. So he was on the lam. I'm like, oh boy, here we go again. X was doing a show with the Murder City Devils opening for him. And so I was backstage and kind of talking to Johnny and Exene. And all of a sudden Exene goes, man, get that guy away from me. Don't let him come talk to me. And I was like, who are you talking about? And I turned around and it's Mad Mark. And he was kind of like that. And he saw me and it's like one of these things, you know, like, hey. And I was like, are you talking about Mark? And she's like, yeah, man, that guy, you know, get him away from me. He beats up women. And I was like, fuck. You know, and so I just kind of went over and I kind of walked over to him and put my arm around him and just kind of just walked him away.
Did he ask why?
No, he knew. I mean, and he just stayed at this one table. I mean, it was a big backstage area, right? And he just stayed at this one table with the Murray City Devil, you know, kids. So, and I just thought, man, that's pretty fucking weird. Okay, so I didn't hear from Mark for a long time after this X thing and all that. I was at home, and it was a Sunday afternoon, and I'd just gone out and got a bunch of groceries and all that. And I got a phone call, and it's like, Heff. And I was like, yeah, who's this? You know, and it's like, this is Mad Mark. And I was like, oh wow, what's going on? You know, how you doing? And he's like, goes, well, I got to tell you, I'm not doing very well, and I don't know how to tell you this, but you know, everything I've told you the last 2 years has been a lie. And I was just like, what? And it's like, even talking about it, this goosebumps come up because it was just so overwhelming and just so out of the blue. And I was like, well, so what? You know, and he's like, well, me and I'm still at that hotel, and me and my girlfriend are here, and we've been trying to kick now for 3 days, and you know, I've been doing heroin the whole time. I've been talking to you, and I feel really bad about it, but I don't know where to turn to, and you're the only person I can think of, and we need to get out of this hotel, and we need to, you know, we need some help. And I was like, oh fuck, you know. So I oh, and they had a dog. They had like this big Doberman Pinscher. And he goes, and our dog doesn't have any dog food, and it hasn't eaten for a week, and we're, you know, I was like, okay, where are you at? You know, and so he told me, and so I took all the groceries I bought and a case of bottled water, and I went up there and I knocked on the door, and they opened, and some dog food, you know. And they opened up this door of this hotel room that's maybe twice as big as this room here, maybe 30 feet across, you know, one bed. And from this wall, maybe 2 feet in, on the wall where there would be the dresser drawers and all that, it was all fucking just stacked full of Mark's shit. I mean, just shirts and I mean, it's like I couldn't believe it. And so I walk in there, and his wife, I didn't know, Lyn, is dry heaving the whole time, and I was there for like 6 hours, and I didn't know what to do. And I knew that Mark wanted me to say to him, hey, come to my house, you know, you can stay in my house, and you know, I'll take care of you and all that. But I couldn't do it. I fucking couldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. You know, it's just like, you know, the guy's ripped me off too many times, and he's, you know, he goes for the jugular and he hurts, and he goes for the heart and he hurts. You know, it's like, yank, come on, it's me, Mark. You know, come on, fix me up, and I just couldn't do it, and so I spent like 6 hours with them, and I just explained to him. I said, look, you know, I'm not going to give you any fucking money. You know, here's all the groceries I just bought. There's a case of bottled water. There's dog food. There's nothing else I can do. And the whole time, the whole 6 hours, Lyn was dry heaving on the side of the bed, just, and it was just, and so finally I just said, look, you know, only thing I can think of, Mark, is, you know, I'll take you like to an NA meeting. So I got on the, got the Yellow Pages out, and I called, and there was one like, I don't know, maybe a mile away or something. And so at 9 o'clock, I took Mark down there, and we walked in, and I mean, that guy's, his face was just pasty white. I mean, it was just, I mean, it was like candle wax. So we went in there, and I walked in, I was like, well, I kind of really don't know what to do here, but this is my friend Mark, and you guys need to listen to him, and Mark got up and said, my name's Mad Mark, I've been shooting heroin, been doing it all my life, and I mean, like, I heard the whole thing, and I shouldn't divulge any of that stuff. And then I talked to him like every day that week, and just to make sure they were okay. And so somehow they got airline tickets to go down to Las Vegas. So I took them down to the airport, and when they said goodbye, I knew that was going to be the last time I ever saw him. I just knew, because either he was going to, be totally, and he looked better, than the prior week. But I knew it was either make it or break it, and I just knew they weren't going to make it.
So we went to Seattle, and he worked there. We were there about 8 months, and we hated it there. It was raining and cold all the time. And he realized that he could not repair my relationship with my mother, so then he decided to try to repair my relationship with my father. So we went to Vegas, where then he realized within a month that was impossible, and we just kind of got stuck there. He worked.
I think it was around 98, 99 that he moved to Las Vegas, and I would still talk to him out there when I go through. I come and visit him at the shops that he was at, and it was sort of sad. I mean, when I go through town, it was usually with a band, and we would just be go in for the day, load up all the gear, and when I could, I'd sneak off for a couple hours, go visit him at the tattoo shop, wherever he was working. And it seemed like he was doing doing decent out there, from what he would let on to me. And when I was in LA, I'd always try and give him a call every couple months, every month or two, and just see how he's doing. Try and talk him into coming out to LA and come and work at my shop. I started my shop in 2000. March of 2000, and I wanted to get him out there to work at the shop and get him back to LA, and he would tell me he would think about it and see what he could do, but it never came to be.
At that point, I do know that he began to use again. Anything before that I do not know about. But I do believe, because sobriety was very important to Mark, I do believe that he started using again, and I went with him because he was in pain, because I'm in the same pain right now. And he felt that he had to take care of me. Mark was like that. Mark was the best husband that any woman could ever want. He treated me like I was the only woman on the planet. He was the only man I've ever been with that I knew where he was 24 hours a day. If he was going to be 5 minutes late from work, he'd call me. And that was our life. We were as normal as two dying people can be. And on January 30th, I remember the day because my brother committed suicide that day. Mark went out to get coffee to wake me up with and never returned. and I found out that the FBI had arrested him for the charge in 1998 that had been dismissed. And I was shocked because, I mean, Marc and I in Seattle, especially in Las Vegas, we stood out like sore thumbs. I mean, we were like neon signs ourselves compared to the people that live in Vegas. So we continually were stopped by the police. There were no warrants. And then when he was arrested, they didn't give him his methadone. They didn't give him his diabetic diet. They didn't give him the pills that they should have given him as a diabetic. And he was in jail for about 6 weeks. And I went to court, and I sat there the whole first day, and they didn't try him. I went the next day, and they released him. Now, Marc told me when he was in jail that he was bleeding profusely from the mouth. Diabetics, gums bleed when they don't have a proper diet, and he thought that's what it was, but big clumps were coming up. And a doctor examined him and asked him why these big clumps were coming up. And on the paper, which I have, it's scrawled across it that drug addict. People don't bleed profusely from their mouths from kicking drugs. He was finally released on the 5th of March when I was here in LA, and he wasn't processed out until the 6th.
Marc called, and I hadn't talked to him in 5 years, and I've missed you. So many people have missed you. We've all missed you. He's like, yeah, well, I just needed to get away for a while. And I was like, okay, I understand that. And I said, oh, you just disappeared. And he goes, and he said, well, that was kind of the point, wasn't it? And I was like, okay, cool, I respect that. And then we were just talked. It was like a 10-minute conversation. And then he said, well, I got to go. And I said, okay, so he's like, so if you're ever in Las Vegas, make sure you come see me. And I was like, what? You're going to leave town without me seeing you? And he's like, well, things are kind of, and I'm like, no. No, that's not going to happen. I go, I have to see you. This is crazy. And then the next day, Marc calls me again. And he's like, Iris, I really hate to do this. And I know what follows that statement. It's always about asking for money. And he said, I need to borrow some money. And I was like, oh, fuck. And he just started, going into this story. He's like, I was just in jail for 30 days. I had it, I'm like broke. They arrested me in Las Vegas from the charges I was running on. And Lyn has had breast cancer for the past year. And we just like spent all the money on that. And he just went in, and I was like, Marc, stop. You don't have to tell me all this. I don't know. I have to talk to my husband because, like I said, he was just laid off. And so we're trying to, figure out, I don't know if I can give you all the money to get home, but I know I can give you some of it. And then I called Tony, and we both agreed that we needed to give him this money, like all of it, because more than like a cry for money, it just sounded like a cry for humanity, And Tony's first question to me was like, do you think it's for drugs? And I said, no, I'm going to meet them at the bus station. I'll buy their tickets, And when I saw him at the bus station, it was true. It just looked like the world had been mean to Marc for a very long time. Like the world hadn't been nice to Marc for a very long time.
You haven't seen him for 5 years, right?
Yeah, and it just seemed like when I saw him, he hadn't seen any humanity in a really long time. So that's what I mean. It wasn't a cry for money. It was just a cry for help, like a human connection without anything attached to it. Like, I'm sure all the stuff that he'd been involved in all year, like in Las Vegas where they were living and the world that they were living in, it sounded, the stuff that I hear, it sounded like he'd kind of built kind of a very small, dark life for himself, for him and Lyn. And I got there before them, and I was just sort of waiting around, and, you know, he got out of the car, and I was, you know, I ran up to him to give him a hug, and he looked great, except he had a distended stomach.
What do you mean?
Well, like, it's when people's livers start to failure, their stomach starts to bloat, and it looks like they have a belly, but you can tell it's a liver thing because the rest of the body's so skinny. And I tried not to like look straight at it, but I couldn't help but notice. And he came up and gave me a hug, and he was like, "Wow, you look really great. Married life's been really good to you." And I said, "Yeah, I'm really lucky, and just been taking care of myself," and just kind of, and I said, "You guys are doing great. You guys look great, you know." And he goes, "Yeah, we're doing really good. We've been taking really good care of ourselves." And, you know, he points to his belly. He's like, "Don't mind this. This was just the bad jail food and my diabetes, you know, the mix of that. And that's why, that's all this is. I'm going to be around for a long time." And, you know, it came time for me to leave. And so I said my goodbyes, and I said, you know, I gave Lyn a hug, and I said, "You guys take care of each other, you know." And, you know, I just kind of, and I hugged Marc goodbye, and I waved to him, and, you know, we just kind of exchanged this look, like he was like, you know, "Thank you." And I was like, you know, "Don't even worry about it." Just like a really sweet goodbye. But I can't tell you that I couldn't get out of there fast enough. And I walked out of there, and I just thought, I was really sad for him and really grateful that, you know, I wasn't still living that life. Like, we weren't, I mean, I was so sorry that he was stuck there, but that I'm really happy that we didn't get stuck together there. And I just feel like I'd kind of gotten out of something really dark. And, but I was really hopeful for him. And, you know, while we were sitting there, he admitted to me that he'd been in jail, and he kicked like a 90 milligram a day methadone habit, and that he'd been strung out all this time. And he was like, "I just want to get honest about it, and I don't want to live this way anymore, and I really want to get clean, and I want to move back to LA, and I want to, you know, be with everyone, and, you know, and just get back on track." You know, and he was like really determined to do that. And I really, you know, it sounded really good to me. I was really excited and looking forward to that for him. And then when I walked out of the bus station and we said our goodbyes, I just knew, like, my first thought was, I'm never going to see him again.
And then we went home. And the next morning when we woke up, he said to me, "Where am I? Who are you?" And I thought he was joking. And I said, "I'm your wife." He goes, "You're not my wife." And I said, "Marc, it's me, Lyn." And then he turned it around like it was a joke, like it snapped in his head. And I know exactly now what it is because I'm having it. You start to forget things. And he made it into a joke. And I just took it as a joke. I didn't make much of it. And then on the morning of the 11th, we were both shattered. both of us. I had gotten down to about 116 pounds, 5'9". It's pretty much skin and bone. And his hair had gone gray in jail, completely gray. And I woke up the morning of the 11th to this ungodly retching. And I jumped up and I said, "What's wrong?" And I ran to the bathroom and he flushed the toilet really quick and he said, "Nothing. I'm just throwing up, I'm fine." But I could smell the blood. And I told him that. I said, "I can smell it. There's blood. You got blood on your mouth. What's wrong?" He goes, "Nothing, I'm okay." I went back and laid down for a little while and I couldn't sleep because I knew what he was doing. He was throwing up blood, pure blood. And I heard him retching again, and I got up and I fought with him all day long to try to get him to let me call the paramedics. He wouldn't let me. I'd get the phone, he'd take the phone from me. I'd say, "I need to go buy cigarettes." He'd say, "We have cigarettes." I'd tell him I need to go to the neighbors to borrow something. He wouldn't let me out the door. Until 11:30 that night, he finally was so weak that he let me call. And when I turned the light on and looked at him, he was bright yellow, and I knew. And they took him in, and they took him straight into the emergency room, which, you know, when they do that, it's serious. And they asked him to sign a paper to band his esophagus. And at that point, he couldn't see well enough to write his name on the paper. He kept saying, "Here, baby, right here? Should I write here?" And he wrote his name 3 times, 4 times. And finally, I took his hand and put it on it and said, "Write your name," and he wrote it. And I sat there with him, and they had put a catheter in him. And they had put it in wrong, and he had a PA, and I know how to put a catheter in right. So I took out his PA and took out the catheter, and he kept going, "Baby, I gotta pee, I gotta pee." So I put the catheter in right, and he didn't even know that I had done that. And I said, "You can pee, baby, it's all right." And he goes, "I'm gonna pee on myself." And I said, "No, you won't." And I went and I got one of those buckets that they give you to throw up in, and I held it under his penis with the catheter in it. And I said, "You can pee, baby. I've got the bucket under you. You can go." And I sat there with him, and then I had to go home to feed our dogs. And I ran home and I fed the dogs, and I came back, and Marc was out cold with the respirator down his throat. And I said, "What the fuck happened to my husband?" And the nurse looked at me like I was a goddamn idiot and said, "Your husband was disturbing the other patients, so we gave him a big fat shot of Ativan." I told them, "Take the respirator out of him. We can't do that." I said, "I want to sign a DNR." I signed a DNR, they ignored it. He wanted that. We discussed it. We'd both discussed it. If we ever got to the point where we were having to be kept alive artificially, that we did not want to be kept alive artificially. So they proceeded from the 11th until all through the night of the 11th, all through the 12th, to do dialysis on him, to do everything they could to run up the bill. And I kept saying to them, his liver is not working. A human being cannot live without a liver. Why are you doing this? Stop it. They didn't listen to me. So on the early morning of the 14th, about 3 in the morning, all through the time that he was in the hospital, I was with him, except for the times I had to go feed our dogs. And I would read to him and talk to him and talk about things we did together, and because I know that hearing is the last thing to go. And I was reading to him, and he had the respirator down his throat, and I was holding his hands. And I said to him, baby, can you hear me? If you can hear me, squeeze my hand, please. If you can hear me, please squeeze my hand. So he opened one eye and he looked directly at me, and tears were streaming down his face, and he squeezed my hand 3 times. And I knew that he heard me. And I told him, baby, please let go. Please just let go. And I had to go home to feed the dog again. Went home to feed the dog. At 5 o'clock, I got a phone call from the hospital saying to me, Mrs. Hoffman, we can't keep your husband's blood pressure up anymore. Would you like to come in? I said, do you mean he's dying? And they said, yes, all perky. And I said, what the fuck do you think? I've been sitting there for 3 days. Of course I want to come in. And I was dressed, and so I threw my shoes on. And at 5:06, both of our dogs started howling. So I know that Marc died at 5:06. We had a Rottweiler and a Doberman, and they don't howl. So I rushed to the hospital, and they had the defibrillators on him, and I went berserk. I knocked everything over and started ripping the tubes out and screaming at them. And they pulled me out, and they told me to go sit in the waiting room while they cleaned him up. And that was it. I called a rabbi, and the rabbi came in and said the blessing. And I curled up next to him. And I cried. And I told him I loved him. And that was it. He was dead.
When was that? What day was that?
That was March 14th.
You know, I tried to call hospital. They wouldn't let me talk to him. They wouldn't let me talk to a nurse. He was in a coma. And then Thursday, Lyn called me and told me that he died. So, you know, that was just really sad.
You didn't think that was going to happen?